This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. One of the great Gedolim that graced the areas that we're traveling through now, we made an attempt to be able to visit his kever, but the truth is he doesn't have an actual kever, is the Abarbanel. Now, in Eretz Yisrael today there's a big fad, you could call it, but it has Yesoida Maharei Kodesh, that on Lag BaOmer many people go to the kever of Shemar Yechai. But there's actually a very interesting sefer by one of the great Mekubalim today, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, called Eid Hagal, which is all about Lag BaOmer. So he speaks about the idea, what about people who can't make it to the kever of the Rashbi on Lag BaOmer? So Rabbi Yaakov Hillel quotes the Divrei Chazal that tzaddikim, you don't need a matzeva for tzaddikim, dvarim him matzeva. The words of the tzaddikim are the matzeva itself. The person needs to be mispalel. It's not even necessary to go to the kever. You learn the words of the tzaddik, and those words themselves are a makom kadosh and an eis rotzen to be mispalel. So we hope by staying over some of the history and the Divrei Torah Abarbanel, we could take the opportunity to be mispalel, and it's even more of an eis rotzen than the kever itself. For me, it is a great zechus to have the opportunity to tell you about one of the all-time great leaders and princes in Klal Yisrael, the Abarbanel. This is someone who I personally feel a very deep connection with. Well, his name was Rabbi Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. We call him the Abarbanel. In the more scholarly circles, he's called the Abarbanel. But the Abarbanel is certainly most well known for his magnum opus, for his great commentary on Tanakh. But what many are not aware of is a comment of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky once made the following comment. He says, the Abarbanel was not only a Mefarish al Torah, but the Abarbanel was actually part of the halachic Mesorah of Klal Yisrael. So for instance, if you look in the Ramah in Yerodea, Hilchos Talmud Torah, Siman Reish Mem Vav, Siman Reish Mem Vav Sib Chaf Aleph, the Ramah quotes the halachic ruling of the Abarbanel. Or the Beis Yosef himself. The Beis Yosef in Hilchos, by the way, the Beis Yosef was published right here in Venice. The Beis Yosef writes in Hilchos Brachos that Maran Pasi raised the question on the Rambam, and who was present? It was in front of, says the Beis Yosef, Hanesher Hagadol, the great eagle, referring to Rabbi Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. Now, the Abarbanel began his career in Portugal. He was born in Lisbon, in the capital of Portugal, in the year Kuf Sadi Ches. So, for those of you who were on the bus with us yesterday, how do you translate that into the secular dates? Who remembers the formula? You just add what? 1240. Kuf Sadi Ches, 1438. And because of the Abarbanel's manifold talents, he becomes the treasurer of King Alfonso. By the way, the Abarbanel said that King Alfonso was a righteous ruler. However, gentlemen, this is very interesting. Listen, in 1481, King Alfonso dies, and he's taken over by his son Wao, Joao, with a little zarka on the 8th. And Wao, the first thing he does is he basically executes all of his father's advisors. He falsely accuses them of treason. And then the Abarbanel gets a message that King Wao would like his advice. The only thing is, King Wao did not want the advice of the Abarbanel. King Wao wanted to chop off the Abarbanel's head. So the Abarbanel makes a dash out of Portugal, and his pursuers are at his back. He crosses the border into Spain literally seconds ahead of his pursuers. Abarbanel comes to Spain penniless, in complete anonymity, which is always a good thing for a rabbi, and he arrives in Toledo. Now for the first time in his life, he has some respite. He begins to write his commentary on Sefer Yehoshua, Sefer Shoftim, Sefer Shmuel. Now, very important to know that the Abarbanel's literary output was kemat supernatural. Abarbanel begins his commentary on Sefer Yehoshua, Yud Cheshvan Reish Mem Daled. Reish Mem Daled. What year is that? Reish Mem Dalet, 1484. He completed it, Chav Vav Cheshvan. Amazing. Abarbanel wrote the entire parish in 16 days. He wrote his entire parish on Yeshua in 16 days. He starts his commentary on Sefer Shoftim. He begins Rosh Chodesh Kislev. When does he finish? Chanukah. So he wrote his whole parish on Shoftim, 25 days. His commentary on Shmuel is much longer. It takes him 2.5 months. Rosh Chodesh Teves to Yud Gimel Adar. However, it is not long before he's summoned to serve as the finance minister to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. And in this capacity, the Abarbanel helps Spain. It raises Spain up to become the world superpower. Financial. Is what? Yeah, we're almost there. Yeah. But times of peace will not last long. Ferdinand and Isabella began their ambition of something called Reconquista. What's Reconquista? To reconquer the entire Iberian Peninsula from Arab control. The Arabs came in, they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in the year 711. Well, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they want to reconquer the Iberian Peninsula. So in 1487, Malaga falls to the Christian monarchs, with only one Arab stronghold remaining in the entire Iberian Peninsula. And then, the ominous year, 1492 arrived. January 2nd, 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they won a great victory. This is one of the historic battles of all time. They attacked Granada, the Battle of Granada, one of the greatest military victories in history. They completed Reconquista. And this arrogant king returns to his palace, says Abarbanel, and I'm sure many of us have heard a lot of information about the Spanish Inquisition, but what I'm about to tell you is considered the most authentic first-hand account of the Spanish Inquisition based on the writings of the Abarbanel himself in his commentary to Yehoshua, Melachim, and Hosea. Well, this arrogant king returns to his palace. The Abarbanel quotes the pasuk, Vayomer Esav Belibai, Bama Esratzel Elikai, how can I ever repay God? If not, to gather all of the miserable Jews who walk in darkness and force them to embrace the true religion, says King Ferdinand. And if they don't, they will be banished from the entire Iberian Peninsula. Says Abarbanel, Yotza Dvar HaMelech V'dasai Kedas Melech Paras Umadai. And what year did it happen? 1492. Now, very interestingly, many Achronim, they search for a Muslim in Tanakh for a remez to this ominous year of 1492. The Abarbanel himself, in his commentary to Hosea, Parakeh Pasuk Zayin, says that the year 1492 is Merumaz in the Pasuk in Yirmiyah, that we lay on Rosh Hashanah and the Haftarah, Mizarei Yisrael Akabtzenu. Mizarei is the gematria of what? 252. What year is 252? Who remembers the formula? Yeah, you add 1240, 1492. Mizarei Yisrael Akabtzenu. I'll tell you another remez. There's a sefer called Semach David. Who's Semach David? Rav David Gans. David Gans is a Talmud of the Ramah. Unbelievable story that Semach David lived in Germany. As a young boy, he has a tremendous cheshek to learn from the Ramah, so he took a walk. He decided to walk from Germany to Krakow. Imagine, a young boy walks from Germany to Krakow to learn from the Ramah. The Ramah encourages him to learn history, to write a work on history. It says that Semach David, the remez to 1492 is in the pasuk, Rabim B'nei Shoimema. Rabim B'nei Shoimema. By the way, amazingly, we mentioned yesterday from Rabbi Yosef Yaivitz, one of the Gerushei Sfarad, he wrote a sefer Or HaChaim. Or HaChaim is a philosophical work where he explains the reasons why he thinks the Spanish Inquisition happened. Unbelievably, who wrote footnotes on the sefer Or HaChaim? The last person who you'd ever expect to write footnotes on a philosophical sefer, Rav Tzvi Elimelech Midinov, the Bnei Yissaschar, wrote footnotes on the Sefer Or HaChaim of Rav Yosef Yaivitz. By the way, the Semach David, aside from being a historian, was a great astronomer. we actually have correspondence between the Tzemach David and Tycho Brahe and Johann Kepler. They actually corresponded with the Tzemach David on astronomy. Well, says Abarbanel, the decree went forth that in 3 months, any Jew who would not accept the Christian faith would be banished from the Iberian Peninsula. And in what month did this fall out on? The ominous month of Av. But frighteningly, says Abarbanel, the dagger in the heart was not only did the day fall out in the month of Av, but it was scheduled for Thursday, August 2nd, 1492, Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av was the date selected for the Spanish Inquisition. Frekta Abarbanel, did King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella know about Tisha B'Av? They never heard about Tisha B'Av. Says Abarbanel, V'hu lo yada mizeh hazman davar. They were clueless. They didn't know it was going to be Tisha B'Av. Ki'ilu min hashamayim hidrichuhu lahagbalas hazman hazeh. It was like when Hashamayim, the Yevon Hashem guided them. Like the Gemara says about the Churim Bayesheni. How do we know it happened on Tisha B'Av? Megalgalin choiv al yidei chayev. So too the Spanish Inquisition fell out on Tisha B'Av. And, says Abarbanel, the law went out that any Jews living in Sephard, in Sicily, in Majorca, in Sardinia, convert or be expelled. And now the Abarbanel writes possibly his most moving words. Says Abarbanel, I was sitting in the palace. I couldn't keep my mouth closed. I risked my life and I screamed with every fiber of my being. And I said to the king, save these people. What do you want from them? You want money? Money's not an issue. I will personally raise a hefty ransom for each and every Jew. I pleaded with them, I begged them. And you know, right before the edict was about to be signed, Ferdinand and Isabella, they had a change of heart. Abarbanel was successful in moving them and stirring them. What happened? Whereupon the great and terrible Inquisitor, Torquemada, Thomas D. Torquemada, came running in, waving a cross, ranting and raving. He shook Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to the core. They got scared, they got frightened. Torquemada said, God is not happy with you. God will take revenge against you for having mercy on the miserable Jews. They asked Abarbanel to leave the room. The edict was signed. It was completed. Thursday, August 2nd, Tisha B'Av. And the Abarbanel says, as bad as King Ferdinand was, it wasn't even him. V'hamalka oimedes liyaminoi lesitnoi. It was Queen Isabella. She was the Satan. She was the Satan standing on his right side. By the way, Torquemada, before he was appointed the Grand Inquisitor, he was the official confessor of the Inquisition. What does that mean? They would take Yidden, they would put them on a wooden bench, and they would stretch them out like in Sodom. They would then drive rusty screwdrivers up their fingernails and up their toenails, either convert or die. And Torquemada was the grand confessor. Within a few years of Torquemada's assumption of his position, the Inquisition already took 30,000 lives. The smoke of the auto de fe hovered over Spain like a dark cloud. Now, many of us are familiar with the expression, the golden age of Spain, right? V'haya v'lo nivra. It never happened. There was no golden age of Spain. Spanish Jewish history was one long recurring torture chamber. People burned on every street corner. So why do we say the golden age of Spain? Says Rabbi Kitov, it's a classic Jewish phenomenon. When we leave the Galus, we remember fondly the good imaginary times that never happened. Look at us in Mitzrayim. We left Mitzrayim. Oh, Zacharnu es Hadaga. Mitzrayim was geschmack. They had sushi. They had sushi. It was a Holocaust. They put our babies in the Nile. They built our babies into the pyramids. There was a very small 200-year reprieve. By the way, ironically, only under the rule of the Muslims. of the Arabs. But under Christian rule, Spain was a Holocaust. But this is a classic Jewish phenomenon. We look back longingly at a Golus where times were never good, and we look back at imaginary times. Well, says Abarbanel, since Golus Yerushalayim, we never had such a tragedy. Just a question for your thought. You know, on Tisha B'Av, we recite many kinnis. We talk about the Crusades. We talk about Shali Srufa V'Esh, the burning of the Talmud. We speak about the Asara Haruge Malchus. And to me, it's a great mystery why, of all tragedies, the one that actually happened on Tisha B'Av, there is no mention of. Isn't the Spanish Inquisition glaringly omitted? Where is it? Why is there no mention of the Spanish Inquisition in the kinnis of Tisha B'Av? And I'll share with you the reason that I believe. But, says Abarbanel, between Yud Zayin Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, 300,000 Yidden are forced to leave Spain. Says Abarbanel, and I among them. I was given the exclusive rights to remain in the country, to be the finance minister of Spain, but instead I chose to go into exile with my brethren. And says the Abarbanel, as we were leaving, we were comforted by one thing and one thing only. The Yatsa Malcolm Lefnehem Hashem Berosham. We felt the presence of the Shekhinah going into Golus with us. And where did we go? We have no idea. Some went to Portugal. Some went to Navarre. We suffered. We were broken. Many took ships. Many of the ships sunk. Many were capsized. I myself made my way by ship, and I ended up in Naples. By the way, one of the great Rebbes in Europe, many centuries later, made his way to Naples. The Radzina Rebbe, in his quest for Tchelas, went to the great aquarium in Naples. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see that aquarium this trip. Mirz Hashem, our next ENS trip to Italy, we hope to schedule the great aquarium in Naples. Okay, Ellie? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Amazingly, during the course of the Abarbanel's travels, the Abarbanel lost his only manuscript on Sefer Devarim. Well, Hafla V'Fela, the Abarbanel comes to Italy, he comes to Corfu, and in Corfu he meets a Yid who had made somehow a copy on his manuscript of Devarim, and Abarbanel is able to republish his Sefer on Devarim. Says Abarbanel, I arrive in Naples in the year 1493. Gerim is Gematria 253, that's the Gematria of 1493. Abarbanel comes to Monopoli in South Italy. Finally, 1503, the Abarbanel comes to the great city of Venice. In Venice, the Abarbanel publishes many of his works. So, the Abarbanel published the Sefer Rosh Amona on the Rambam Mor Nevuchim. The Abarbanel published a trilogy, 3 volumes on the coming of Mashiach. What are they called? Number 1, Yeshua's Mashiachai. Number 2, Mayone HaYeshua. And number 3, Mashmiya Yeshua. He wrote a commentary to Pirkei Avos called Nachalas Avos. Let me share with you something that Abarbanel writes in the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos. Mamish Dvarim Noiraim. Says Abarbanel, I come to Italy, and I can't believe it. In Italy I saw something that I never saw in my entire life. It doesn't make any sense. Listen to this. What did the Abarbanel see in Italy that he never saw before? Rabbis. What's a rabbi, says Abarbanel. What's a rabbi? Either you know the Torah, or you're an Amoritz. What's a rabbi? What's the person doing sitting in the front of the shul facing everybody else? You know, I once heard, there are 2 kinds of Yidden. They're Yidden, and then they're Rabbanim. Rabbanim are not Yidden? No. Al Yisrael, the Rabbanim. Says Abarbanel, what's a Rav? There's no such thing as a Rav. Listen to what he says. Achare boyi li Italia, matzasi shenesvashid haminag lismach. I saw a very strange custom. smicha. Says Abarbanel, I know there's something called v'samach yodai al rosh hapar. But what kind of smicha? What's smicha? We don't have smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu. Says Abarbanel, smicha is a goyish shazach. Where does it come from? Lo yadati me'ayin balahem ha'heter. Im lo shekanu midarkei ha'amim ha'osim doktir. The Jews were jealous of the goyim. They wanted to have clergy, so they have rabbis. It says Abarbanel, there's no such thing as a rabbi. Either you know the Torah, or you're an Am Haaretz. Okay. Another great work of Abarbanel. He wrote the Haggadah, Zevach Pesach. Now, amazingly, yesterday, we took a secret trip to Lido Island, where we wanted to visit the kever of one of the great Rabbanim in Venice, Rabbi Yehuda of Modena. Well, none other than Rabbi Yehuda of Modena wrote a kitzur on the Abarbanel's Haggadah, Zevach Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda of Modena calls it Sali Eish. Now, let me tell you something very interesting about one of the Gerushei Sfarad. You have somebody by the name of Rabbi Avram Zakuto. Rabbi Avram Zakuto, we're going to be at the kever later today of the Rav Moshe Zakuto, no relation. Rabbi Avram Zakuto was a great astronomer. In fact, there's something called the Astrolab, invented by Rabbi Avram Zakuto. One of Rabbi Avram Zakuto's great Talmidim was Christopher Columbus. In fact, half of a fella, writes Rabbi Victor Miller in the Sefer Rejoice, O Youth, the greatest book in English ever written. Says Rabbi Victor Miller, the Spanish Inquisition was on August 2nd. Friday morning, August 3rd, Christopher Columbus set sail to discover the next great Jewish haven. As ships were taking Yidden out to Africa, to all over the world for Golos, Christopher Columbus and the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria passed by all these Yidden going into Golos, because Loy Alman Li Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shalom always paves the way before he brings the Golos for the next great haven for the Jewish people. Now let me tell you a little story about Christopher Columbus that is published in the Sefer Hayuchsin Hagadol of Rabbi Avram Zakuto. Christopher Columbus was somewhere in the Americas, and he was captured by cannibals. And they took him, and they put him in a groise pot. And they put a fire under him, and they were going to cook him for supper. And out of the deep recesses of Christopher Columbus' mind, he remembered what his Rebbe taught him, Rabbi Avram Zakuto, where he had with him the Sefer of Rabbi Avram Zakuto called the Perpetual Almanac. And in the Perpetual Almanac, Christopher Columbus predicted a lunar eclipse. Says Christopher Columbus to the cannibals, if you don't release me immediately, I will pray to my gods and I will blot out the light of the moon. So they gave him a shot. Sure enough, 2 days later, the moon disappeared. All the natives get down on their hands and knees, and they're kareya u'mishtachava to Christopher Columbus because he blotted out the light of the moon with the help of Rabbi Avram Zakuto. Well, this, if you go to the museum in Portugal today, you could see the Perpetual Almanac of Rabbi Avram Zakuto with the Hagois of none other than Christopher Columbus. Well, we move back to the Abarbanel. Abarbanel was nifter in the year Reish Samaches, 1508. The year Chosar, Reish Samaches. Why do we call that year Chosar? Because we lost two great Gedolei Yisrael. We lost Rabbi Yehuda Mintz, and 5 days later we lost Hanesher Hagadol, Rabbi Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. They are buried right next to each other near Venice. We missed the kever yesterday, but Dvarim Heim Zechroinam. I just want to share with you. We're doing good so far?
When do you make this up? When do you have time to make this up?
When did I have time to make this up? Baruch Hashem, the long bus ride. Let me share with you one Dvar Torah of the Abarbanel that really captures the essence of the personality of the Abarbanel. The Birchas Yaakov, Parsha Sayachi. All the Mefarshim struggle. What in the world is Birchas Yaakov? What is it? Is it a bracha? It can't be a bracha. Ruvain, B'choriyata, Hachaz Kamayim, you're impetuous. What kind of bracha is that? Reishis koichi v'reishis oini. Yeser says yeser oz. Reuven, you lost all power. That's a bracha. What Yaakov Avinu gives Shimon is a bracha. Or apam kiyaz. It's a klala. Elamai, you'll say, it's not a bracha. Yaakov Avinu is just speaking his mind. So to Reuven, he speaks divrei teichacha. To Shimon, he speaks divrei teichacha. To Levi, he speaks divrei teichacha. But to Yehuda, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, he's giving Yehuda a bracha. Then what's Yaakov doing to Zevulun? Zevulun seems to be just real estate advice. Zevulun l'chif yamim yishkoin. So what is Birchas Yaakov? Is it a bracha? Is it a klala? Is it real estate advice? Is it just random thoughts that are passing through Yaakov Avinu? What is Birchas Yaakov? I remember in 3rd grade I had to memorize Birchas Yaakov. Very good. I'm sure we all have it memorized. But nobody has any idea what is Parshas Vayechi. What is it? What's Yaakov Avinu doing? Comes Abarbanel and he breaks through Parshas Vayechi like lightning in the darkness. Says Abarbanel, Yaakov Avinu is laying on his deathbed, and he sees 12 kinderlach with different personalities, with different koiches hanefesh, with different sharish haneshama. What's going to be with Klal Yisrael? How are they going to be unified? You know what they're missing? Malchus. They need a melech. Birchas Yaakov is establishing melucha for Klal Yisrael. And Yaakov is going through his kinderlach one by one and saying why nobody could be a melech other than Yehuda. Reuven, you're a great guy. You're koichi v'reishis oni. There's one problem. You're pachas kamayim. You're impetuous. A king cannot be impetuous. Melech b'mishpat yamid aretz. A king has to be disciplined. A king has to be methodical. A king has to think things through clearly. Shimon, Levi, or Apam, you have a temper. You'll be a Gavaldige Cheder Rabbi. You'll be a Gavaldige Kanoi. But you can't be a Melech. But Yehuda, let's talk about Zevulun for a moment. Zevulun l'chayf yamim yishkoin. You're a great guy too. But you're a businessman. Imagine if somebody would come to the king and at the throne, the king opens up his jacket. He says, oh, you want to buy a watch? I have a few watches I might want to sell you. It's not the personality to be the king. Zevulun doesn't have the personality. Asher, you're a baker, Gavaldik. V'hu yitain madane melech. You'll bake for the king, but you can't be the king. What about Yosef HaTzadik? Yosef, you have the quality for Melucha, but we're getting close. But Vayimaru v'roivu. You don't command the respect of your brothers. They didn't like you. You didn't have the quality to. But Yehuda, Gur Aryeh Yehuda. Whenever there was a controversy, whenever there was a difficulty, who did the brothers listen to? Ma'betza. They listened to Yehuda. Yehuda, you have what it takes to be the melech. You have the qualities. Birchas Yaakov is not a bracha, says Abarbanel. It's not a klola. It's not business advice. It's establishing malchus for Klal Yisrael. Says Abarbanel, throughout Jewish history, Torah leadership always rested in Shevet Yehuda, specifically from David HaMelech. Whether it's David himself, whether it's Shlomo himself, whether it's all the Nasiim. By the way, what's the difference between the Nasi and the Reish Galusa? Tosfos says in Hoyrios, one came from David HaMelech mitzad ha'av, one came from David HaMelech mitzad ha'im. All the Nasiim, Hillel, Ram Gamliel, Reb Shimon Gamliel, Reb Yehuda HaNasi, all came from Shevet Yehuda Malchus Beis David. Says the Abarbanel, he argues with the Ramban. The Ramban says that the Chashmonim were killed out because they usurped the Melucha. Says Abarbanel, no, they didn't usurp the Melucha. There was always a Nasi in Yerushalayim that was the leader of Klal Yisrael. Says the Abarbanel, the Reish Galusa, Ad Hayoim Hazeh. Says the Abarbanel, whether it's in France, whether it's in Spain, whether it's in Italy, Ruba de Ruba of the Gedolei Yisrael come from Shevet Yehuda and David HaMelech. But what's very meaningful to me personally is the fact that the Chida writes about the Abarbanel, that the Abarbanel himself was Choiter Migeza Yishai, was a Ben Achar Ben of David HaMelech. And who more than the Abarbanel exemplified Melucha in Klal Yisrael? What's Melucha? Abarbanel had every opportunity to remain the finance minister for Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, But no, he was a Melech Yisrael. He was B'soich Ha'am. He led us out of the Golos. He led us out of Spain into Italy. Now I want to tell you one final psak of the Abarbanel. On August 2nd, 1492, as Klal Yisrael was being led out of Spain, 300,000 Yidden, the Abarbanel paskined on Tisha B'Av that they should play music on Tisha B'Av. Why? And the reason is because as terrible as the Spanish Inquisition was, we never cry when we leave Golos, because we don't belong in Golos in the first place. And I believe that's the reason why on Tisha B'Av, even though we mention all the Jewish tragedies, the one tragedy that happened on Tisha B'Av we omit. We omit the Spanish Inquisition. And that is because of the great teaching of the Abarbanel, that we never cry when we leave Golos. We didn't belong in Spain, we didn't belong in Italy, we didn't belong in Portugal, and we don't belong in America today. And the great Zechus of the Abarbanel should be making all of us. What?
5 pounds also now.
We also don't belong in the 5 towns, Ellie's saying.
You didn't mention that.
I didn't mention that, you know. The Zechus of the Abarbanel should be making on us. Ad Biaskal Tzedek and Herv Yameinu. Amen. In astronomy. Some people
he made it up on the spot. There's no tape of that, but we'll do another one of the same one.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.